My name's Phil. I'm a Senior Creative Type Director at the Monotype Studio, and I'm here with Emilios, who's our newest Type Director in London. And we're both just sort of helping to work with brands and create great type with brands and agencies. So let's get started. Let's be honest, and frank, I think the state of the world is pretty frantic in general. It's filled with confusion, misinterpretation, misguided thinking, and not to mention the fact that the whole world is just grossly political right now. So as a kind of a worthy idealist, I think it's kind of like difficult to stand by and just pray for resolution. And as designers, I think, and brand makers, we really kind of turn to our work and we seek this kind of digital solidarity in the belief that just putting our energy into something positive, to spread our knowledge of design and, to make we can make a difference by doing that and just shifting gears on our collective cultural trajectory. So this talk is really about having time to pause and reflect on typography, to reassess the things we know about type, or at least we think we know, and redefine what those things mean. Look at the rules that made us, the optics we live by, and the typographic astuteness that really delivers great work and all-round good type for our clients. So think of Typography 3.0 really as Web 3.0, a more open, collaborative, and inclusive version of the internet as we know it. But Typography 3.0 is just that as well. But our focus is with kind of the shape and the application of letters and of their words and their meaning. So Typography 3 is the most inclusive, detail-obsessive, skillfully expressive, and on-trend typography that's made by you, the typographer and brand makers. It's efficient, it's engaging, and hyper-legible. So how can we help you make, use, and scope it in your projects? First, I think we need to understand our origins, looking back, establishing connections and then looking kind of forward is kind of a theme throughout this talk. So knowing our past avoids this kind of duplication of and provides us with, new foundations for our ideas. So how did we get here? And if we're entering version 3, what was 2.5, 2, 1, or even alpha? So just briefly permit us to briefly go down this historical journey of our typographic roots for the uninitiated. So state alpha is really informal inscriptions made by scribes, lettering artists, carving on walls, writing on paper. Not the kind of graffiti arts of today, but Edwin in Cambridge, the prince of scribes at Trinity College in the mid-12th century. And you may have heard of these terms, rustic, uncials, and minuscules, inscriptional lettering styles. And they're pretty illegible to us today, but they're also really beautiful writing systems. And you can see these in the British Library in here too. And obviously, over time, these writing systems, have become much, much clearer. And despite movable type really existing in the Far East for centuries, popular opinion actually says that this hipster revolutionary Johannes Gutenberg created typography V1. If you're inclined, you can dig a little deeper into the nest and you'll find tons of voices coming out of the woodwork, just making claims to the invention of type throughout history. But for the sake of argument, the baseline was set for Western civilization by Johannes. And his 42-line Bible was printed in the 15th century, and it's what we really know is kind of the first book created with movable type. The scribes wept as letters you could kind of touch, feel, and place with very limited design experience. It began instigating this mass communication via the printing press. And one typography machine led to another, and I guess it does today. Type's not lettering, it's this kind of means of reproduction, of continuity and cohesion. So 19th century type 1.5, it really was a factory process. So letters on conveyor belts, mass produced to serve typesetting machines such as the linotype, and then the vast array of typewriting systems that emerged after that. So remember now, this is a time when typesetting was a skilled trade service, created within closed shops. So no one was really rocking their linotype at home. It's a very loud, messy machine. And design made with machines actually has this rigid, formal quality. And that's because design is informed by the method. Even to this day, the linotype machines make lines of type, and this system was and is an inherent design structure. So as designers, we have built our own rules around our graphic output, from the rigid forms of line casting to now in the wireframes that we make for web browsers. And in the 1940s, things changed. This new kind of machine arrived, the Photon 200 and its stroboscopic disc. So Type 2.0 is the age of phototype. These unbelievably huge systems, controlled and utilized both typographic and photographic technology. You had lenses, spools of film, CRT screens. They just enabled us to magnify and scale letters at whim in ways we'd never really seen before. And our beloved letraset too, that emerged in the late 50s. And with letraset, came this home to around 400 display fonts. Letraset really, for me, I guess, signaled the birth of this more expressive, DIY, kind of even punk approach to type and graphic design. So type knowingly kind of became rooted in to the core of graphic design and the tonality of speech. And we began almost like calling on type's distinctive and memorable superpowers. But type pivots as life pivots, and keyboards, mice, Icarus, PostScript, TrueType and Apple, all these electronic boxes began bleeping and typefaces became pixels. And we were very thankful for that. And when have we as designers ever held this steady state? We're constantly asking for more, in terms of more creativity, more functionality, and this more optimal design process. So PostScript, PostScript fonts, they turned to opentype, and what was once this premium service became this viable reality. So all of us become designers. Even our mums and dads had access to the PC, and type production just became a little less elitist. So brands recognized kind of this superpower that type had, and they really wanted to own their own voice. And so we jumped forward quite a lot. And here in the UK, we witnessed this kind of slow moving birth of custom type. Frida Sack and David Quay of the Foundry, they created tons of custom fonts for UK brands in the 90s and noughties. And brands such as NatWest, Swiss International Airlines, and here too for the Science Museum. And Jason Smith and I at Fontsmith, we created the Channel 4 typeface in 2004. And this typeface really opened up the floodgates for other TV brands such as ITV, BBC One and Sky, just to commission their own custom fonts with us too. And our good friend Jeremy Tankard, he worked with Eurostar, with Sheffield City, with RJ Wiggins and Yale, and of course here at Monotype too. This is a recent project that we made with the 100 cricket brand. So, brands of all sizes, brands in all verticals and all geographies have really begun to wake up and kind of embrace their unique voice, their unique place in the world. And collectively, I think we recognize that brand today and digital today, they're both reading that, type really speaks, and speaking, communicating, engaging hearts and minds with this kind of unique offer has never been more important really for brands, as digital spaces replace physical spaces. And when a brand's typography is quite neutral or ordinary looking, everything else has to really work exceptionally hard, really everything. And so we really believe in our typographic mission. We believe it's quite vital. And the good news is that our industry, the type industry, is really active right now. It's hyperactive. It's a beaming light of creativity. And type designers now, unlike at any other time, can make things very quickly indeed. And that's great. It's also quite terrifying, now more than ever before, I think, it's becoming really important to make the things we make very well. And so what's happening now? Literally today, how did we make yesterday? And so actually, how did yesterday make all of this happen? So with that, I'll hand over to Emilios.
So hello, everybody from me as well. If you go back a bit in the 90s and early 2000s, we had something that we called the multiple masters, and some of you might remember them. But the problem is that they somewhat died, and they were more or less of a commercial failure. And the problem was mostly that people didn't know exactly how to use them, and we didn't really have a fluid digital infrastructure to support their development. But this idea today is coming back as what we call variable fonts. And variable fonts are a natural fit to what we have today, a hyper-mobile world, a world in flux. So Flux is the result, the end product, or as we type designers call it, making design spaces. So if we travel between these design spaces, we have a process known as interpolation. Here is a little secret. Type designers are quite highly effective creatures. So let's say you have this big type family, for example, with a range of styles, and you see here a lot of weights and a lot of widths. So spoiler alert, and many of you might already know this, but not all of these styles were designed individually or drawn by hand. So not at least at today's typefaces. Today's typefaces are born through systematic design spaces. We create space to be as optimal as it can be for your project. So here, for example, we can see design space that includes weight and width, and we see what we call the extremes or the masters. And sometimes you might also have masters in between, so they can provide finer control to the design space as it blends. So imagine moving between this design space and floating between the styles is by choosing the specific iteration you want of the style. This is what we call interpolation, and this is what you really can do nowadays. And it seems quite easy, and you might be also a bit jealous. Well, don't be, because simply by choosing and using a variable font, you can do it as well. So you can toggle the sliders in the applications you have if you're using a variable font, and you can dial in the precise style you want. And I can hear you say, oh my God, I love it. And you're right, we love it too. And this is very, very exciting. But let's take this technology and put it really outside in the real world. So what we have here is Studio Danvers Cities in Motion, which was the intro point in 2019. And this was a project commissioned for rail commuters, and the project that used type in motion to reflect the city in motion. And you can see and imagine type as engagement or disruption and enchantment. So it is really a captivating showcase of what the variable type proportional range and dynamic potential can do. And since 2019, there have been many, many notable works with growing layers of complexity. But this is a really nice one, a recent one from Stone Twins for Songtrad, which is really superb. So Songtrad connects music creators with business, and they animated the brand's monogram as a dancing motif. So they marry creativity with data. And case in point, no one could really make brands like this pre-variable fonts. Here, another example from Collins, where they explored the audible flux with Dynamo Foundry for the San Francisco Symphony. They created a variable font, a serif one, that flexes its excitement to the sound of music. So the results are incredible, and it's another example of just how powerful a variable font can be, and specifically when it's aligned to elevate both the brand voice but also the content. For us, variable fonts and data go hand to hand. So data can really elevate typography as a responsive engagement point. So for example, here, we created a heat map camera system that could control our variable logo for Amsterdam. So camera sense the motion and the user's proximity to move the sliders of the variable font. And we can really see how variable fonts can become interactive experiences. They are a live visual surface. And Google has just launched material symbols on their open source platform. So this is something everybody can go and play with. So here you can fine tune the weight, you can fine tune the feel, the optical size, the grade with their new variable icon font. So variable fonts, they can be more than fonts. They can be symbols, they can be emojis, and they can be color fonts, for example. They can have embedded movies. I mean, limitation is in the minds of the creatives. So you can animate also these fonts by using CSS for the web, and there are really no limits. And more questions coming from the new promo graphics from Brand's new conference by the lettering artist Gio. So this is a brilliant example of the possibilities aimed at the creative industries, because it really suits the audience. But just a word of warning here, try to speak the type that resonates with your brief, for example. What are your client goals? And choose type that tells a story, but also amplifies the meaning. Because a lot of times, just because we can, it doesn't always mean that we should, for example.
Thanks, Emilios. I guess now meet your nostalgic self, if you haven't already. It's this self yearns for something tangible, the familiar, comfortable letter forms of decades past. This is what we're seeing right now. They're back. The soft serif, as we're calling it, it found a new life in the 1970s. And here Cooper Black swashes and souvenir as text type are used in a 1975 Burger King ad. And of course, in full retro soft serve repetition, they're at it again. Nostalgia is a theme, that is not really a driver for change, but it certainly works as this kind of expression of empathy in a world that seeks familiarity during difficult times. So during the pandemic, everyone was asking, should our voice be more human, more accessible, or more empathetic? So this is really kind of a waning trend that explores kind of the past in search of a deeper, meaningful connection with consumers. And of course, sometimes we refer to soft serve as the Shabani effect, following their rebrand in 2017. There's comfort in the kind of warm, soft edge physicality of these letters, but this is really old ideas in a new context, making new ideas. And we need not continue really, but to say nostalgia has run away into a much richer direction. And that direction is Neue Nouveau. So this is really a trend with varying degrees of excess. These kind of organic lines, these dramatic curves, they really speak to nature and the environment. And at its kind of legibility challenging extremes, it speaks to the push, the pull, kind of the twisting, the looping of pandemic times too. So this identity is for more, and it really reinterprets the Motta Ombra typeface. And I guess if there was one project that really captured the Nouveau trend last year, it was their Mother's Park Lane rebrand. And this typeface is actually a reinterpretation again of a font named Ida, a typeface by Heinz Kewens from 1900s. And more kind of Neue Nouveau, it retells kind of the turn of the century kind of Art Nouveau, this one. It's kind of a much more revivalist, kind of a more sturdy reiteration. This is a project that's really kind of crisp and dramatic and inventive. It's a custom typeface by the French agency Voilan and Jeremy, and it's for Faral's restaurant Touche in Saint-Tropez. But we're seeing this kind of softer Nouveau as well, much warmer, more caring, kind of less imposing. It's just more fluid and more accessible. And this is a typeface and a logotype by the Universal Favourite in Australia. But the wild things really exist. They pretty much scream. This trend has its beating heart, a beating heart that really lies in the ornamental, these kind of decorative, flourished arches and meandering lines. And it's interesting because brands today, they really feel this kind of worthy duty to an unearthly focus. I guess there's no surprise really that biodiversity is a trending theme through graphic design too. Neue Nouveau typography is really the perfect entry point to expressing these kind of organic green futures. And what else are we seeing or repeating or echoing within our visual chambers? Shapes known for decades, letterforms reimagined, redrawn, repackaged, and renamed as if they were completely original designs. So our Helvetica Now project, it reimagined Helvetica, but with a genuine intent to kind of utilize optical sizes to make Helvetica the design it needed to be for the digital age. We'll probably all have a Pinterest board like this. As designers, we have this inherent appreciation for modernism, and that appreciation often goes beyond buying and admiring buying and admiring of posters and books. So, we want to live modernism, we want to be modernism, we want to draw modernism shapes. Maybe it's because we want to understand them better and navigate them to our own personal nuances, the things we like. And that's a worthy exercise, but there are so many typefaces that owe a chunk of their DNA to Helvetica, and we're seeing Helvetica not Helvetica, especially in the regular way, just everywhere. So it's almost like we've appropriated kind of the international style as an attitude. It's design and it's kind of under-designed and it's punchy and vibrant. So there's no Helvetica here, but its fingerprints are everywhere. No Helvetica here and more echoes of Helvetica here. And of course, we could probably carry on. There are many fonts, all original, all the same. Type designers want to make their own versions of the classics. And it looks like we can't really help ourselves. There's nothing really bad with that. But in my opinion, this is kind of a revolving kind of anti-progress trend of looking back and actually staying there. And of course, there is a business case behind these designs too. But as a creative mind, I think we kind of have to remind ourselves that why we got into this in the first place. I wanted to be creative, wanted to explore, create new expressions. So I would just say, choose the fonts that move the conversation forward. Choose fonts that improve on the originals and not replicate their mistakes. And choose fonts with worthy kind of and moral objectives. Be a mindful design consumer. And the best type is that made with care. It's type that really answers a need. It's purposeful and visually interesting. It brings something new. So this is type that really furthers visual discourse. And I'll hand back to Emilios.
type 3. We are going to talk a bit about small details here. A few of these things you might already know. But what type 3 really requires are ideals that, speak for good type through the ages. And some of them could be typographic craft or typographic quality, typographic artistry, competence, and know-how. And these are the bedrock of type 3. And I know it doesn't sound quite attractive, but this is what it is. And clients have standards, and so do we, and so do you. So doing things very well beyond expectation will set you and your clients apart from the rest. So allow us to dive a bit into the nuances of type design and collectively level up our typographic selves. When it comes to designing and recognizing good type, I think the most important lesson of all is to learn to trust your eyes. And when we create type, create fonts, we work with a range of applications. It could be like Glyphs or RoboFont, if you might have heard them, but we very often have to also write our own softwares. But the ultimate tool, the finest tool of all in the toolbox, it's our eyes. So learn to recognize good type, and the good type is usually drawn and crafted with love. So let's dive into it a little bit more. Good lines make good type. So what is a good typographic line? So this is very basic, but here it is. Let's start from the super basic. So meet optics. So optically correct type is not mathematically correct type. So let's take a single stroke, for example. If we observe this letter T and we squeeze your eyes a bit, try to squeeze them a bit, you will see that the horizontal portion of the letter and the vertical look kind of wrong. What we do, because our eyes perceive horizontal lines to be quite thicker than they usually are, we use what we call optical correction. And this is by doing small adjustments to make sure that the shapes look the same, even if they're not. So in this case, we make the horizontal lines slightly thinner. So this is mathematically correct, which is not optically correct. And the simple principle can take you along the way when recognizing well-crafted type. Let's say we're all experts now, so it's something off here. And the more we look at it, I'm sure the more you might say that something looks off. So your eyes are starting to train themselves. Ta-da! This is more like it. So weight adjustments happen everywhere. For example, when a stem is a curve or when we have diagonals. And these areas that we fix and we optically adjust, they balance the white space, they create definition, and they can improve legibility and keep our eye strain at bay. So now curves. We probably all enjoy a really nice, crisp and big type. I personally love it, and it's really good to design it as well. But the designing type is not only about making type beautiful. We also need to consider how this curve and how the design translates throughout the styles of the type family, for example. Sure, you might have, for example, an extra bold that looks super, super cool, but what does it mean for the lightweight of the family? Or have you established a role for the extra bold in the project? So when we draw digitally, we use points and handles. You might be familiar with this for Illustrator, for example. So the placement of points and the balance of this handle, it's literally everything. So if you're drawing type or logo type or lettering, add points to the extremes of the curve, so on the tops and on the rights. And always, this will help when expanding weights or styles or widths, for example, and it gives you much more control over the design. So try to balance the tension of the curve as well, the length of the handle. So imagine two of us handling a rope, trying to find the sweet spot for tension while using similar effort. Curves also demand love and attention. So imagine you're in a car and you're driving around the letter. As you drive, you will need enough space to turn. You will need a good curvature with nice balance. And some letters also can be condensed, for example. Others can be extended. Each of these curves, they have their own personality and needs. So we talked about lines. We talked a bit about curves. Let's go to basic shapes as well. As I mentioned earlier, our eyes can often cheat us. So here are some basic shapes, for example. We have a square, we have a triangle, and we have a circle. Again, if you close your eyes a bit and you squint a bit, you will see that the triangle and the circle, they look kind of smaller than the square. And this is because these shapes have all the exact same height with no optical correction. What happens is that we should anticipate these observations and correct accordingly by what we call overshoot. So both in sounds of serif designs, we can always adjust all the letter forms look to be of equal height. And also proportions matter. This is not a stretch and squeeze class, for example. So have you ever needed a typeface to be slightly narrower? And I'm sure you started playing like with the types proportions in InDesign or somewhere until you ask yourself, is this like condensed enough? Is this good? So, well, I will stop and, think some of the choices at this point, because typefaces are not very resilient when it comes to changing their proportions. A squished circle can become an oval, and it doesn't look quite as refined. So when type is not designed for a specific width, it can really suffer. Ta-da! This is optically correct. This is way much more sleek. So if you need a condensed design or an extended width, for example, from a typeface, look for a type family that has these designs already designed, has the styles in the family. Or choose a variable font where you can go and specifically choose the width that you like. So now we will go over some exercises. So this is where I need your help, everybody. If you want to join the conversation, just really fast, just to train a bit our eyes more. So please add your comments in the chat. Next slide, Phil. That will be the first exercise. So there's something wrong with this fake logo here for this tech corporation. So I will give you a minute or two to start adding things inside. I see already a lot of things. Let me see if I can go through. A lot of kerning, a lot of space. I see the R, everything. There is quite a lot of things. Okay, cool. I think we are all very good here. I think a lot of you got a lot of the issues that were here. So for example, let's say a few of them, what would be? The first one, let's say the weight of the part of the horizontal part of the T. The other one would be a lot of you mentioned this, the kerning or no overshoot I hear here. Also the C, I saw that mentioned in. So if we see the X stroke of the C, how the counter ends, you can see that it's quite different from the E. The one is more pinched. So when you design type, we try to find a way of cohesion. We also see the weight of the O might be wrong or the proportions. All that it takes, if we start watching things, we can start fixing them. So next one, Phil. So that would be how theoretically this would look, with a nice overshoot, optically corrected weights, nice joints with enough white space for definition. This one's another example. There are quite a few things wrong here, and this is something that happens a lot of times. For example, people do a lettering or something on the sketch and then they digitize and they stay like this. Well, you shouldn't. There's always room for improvement. So try to think where there could be any problems. For example, I saw the OO, which is okay, the baseline, the X height as well could be inconsistent tension. Yeah, indeed. The curves, the M, the B with the Y, the proportions. Cool. I think we are very good. We're very good. So here are some of the mistakes. I mean, when you have a special script typeface, when you would have a modulation, or you imagine that this is like designed with with a brush, for example, it's always good to try and see where you go in, like how the top of the M would look, what the diagonals would be, what the proportions would be of the letter forms. The relation between the two O's, or the relation of the B with the Y in terms again of proportion or of the weight, and how the contrast will be. So a lot of things, when you start picking inside, you can always adjust, step by step. You can make type more refined and better. So this is much better because it's got the more fluent proportions, the more similar contrast across the style. So the weight is more evenly distributed, as it should be according to the tool that we are writing this, for example. And I think we have another one, just really quick. So we go through and test a bit our eyes. So this is a logotype for a very luxury fake brand. So it's called Luxa. I see the A here, oof, that A, the U and the A, the weight, the kerning, the contrast, OMG. Yeah, the X is not flipped, but it's actually wrong. Yeah, good. It's good that the X is bad. These are good examples. So what's happening here is that we have a few letter forms that, for example, don't have similar weight. We can see that the L and the U are very thin compared to the diagonal of the X, like a lot of you mentioned, or the A. We can see the contrast of the A being very weird compared to everything else. We can see the length of the serifs. They might not be as prominent as they could be. Or the kerning as well, as a lot of you mentioned, also the overshoot of the A. So there are a lot of things to touch here, or the diagonals of the X, they look a bit weird. You can always optically adjust the distance between them. This is how it could be more fixed, like more equal proportions, better contrast, width and proportions distribution. Always room for improvement. Learn to trust your eyes. I like the oof and the kernings and the emojis in the in the chat. Back to you, Phil. Thank you, everybody.
So knowing that knowing what you all know now after that, you're the experts. It's time for 3.0. And making effective kind of typography that is purpose-driven, executed with flair, and is inclusive of each and every one of us. Again, for me as a designer, without purpose, without constraint, there is no design. We're merely reduced to digital decorators making visual fluff. In purpose, we define function, context, and we meet it there. And then through kind of iteration and conceptualization, we define the atmosphere, we create this aroma, this vibe around the type, and we meet that there too. So purpose serves our clients' needs, and it does so with aplomb. The history of typography is this rich tapestry of purposeful typefaces, typefaces that are made to solve problems created by the technologies of the time. So if you remember the phone book, Typography 2.0, well, that used a typeface called Bell Centennial, and it was designed by Matthew Carter for AT&T. And it's a beautiful thing. That's what we're looking at now. But Bell Centennial really had to solve these kind of technical problems and visual problems for the phone book. Letters were designed on a bitmap grid, and then they were vectorized. And then the font, it was created really to maintain legibility at very small sizes. And it does so because of these clunky Inktrap details we see in the letters now. So why am I saying this? Typographic purpose can be a catalyst for new letter shapes and new personalities, new ways of speaking with distinction and authenticity. Inktraps, they were created to solve a simple problem. When used on small and rough paper, they gave enough space for the ink to travel into those letter shapes, and the result was really crisp. So in this visual, they're really, they're filled by pixels. And similarly, in the era of photo composition, Type V2, we had light traps doing similar work for light. So type was all about, these light traps were created all to make type sharp, but they also gave personality. And in 1999, the Yellow Pages commissioned the Foundry to create its own distinctive directory typefaces. And they recognized, even that when purpose was the same, there were multiple avenues. So every designer kind of learns from the next, and you recognize what is successful, you iterate with nuance and create your own new brand identities that reflect your time, place, and products. So the Foundry, they really reinterpreted the Inktrap by creating something new, like an economical wedge design and serving purpose and identity. So this is purpose, creating a new visual language. Love IKEA, of course. Love Verdana, maybe not. Verdana was another typeface made with purpose, and it was made to make our first readable web for low resolution screens, and it did its job well. It is, however, a widely available free font for one, and it wasn't really designed to meet all the touch points that brands deliver to today. So IKEA used Web Perfect Verdana literally everywhere, and then replaced it with Noto, which is another Web Perfect design from 2019. As designers, I think we fight battles for type investment every day. We also have a responsibility to know what a typeface was designed for. Of course, I enjoy and I applaud kind of this subversion, challenging expectations. But I wouldn't probably wear ski boots if I was doing a 100-meter track and field race. So understand why the shapes look the way they do. Please choose type with purpose, or at least knowing intent. And today, Inktraps have evolved. They're almost redundant in a purposeful sense, and yet they do speak to the idea of using less ink. And Patagonia here, they used Inktraps in 2022, and this isn't a phone book, but it is adored as cutting-edge typography. And why? I think, well, it just looks cool. It looks enviable. It looks tailored. It's not really nostalgic. In 2022, the traps really work as a signifier, really as a sign to say that this is bespoke, this is tailored, this is more unique. And we like that, so much of Type 3.0 is design made with an open canvas. So seek out the edges, define your own constraints. They're very often the source of a new vision. Let context and content inform type choice to foster authenticity.
Type 3 is about also executing exceptionally. How do we use type and why do we use it as we use it? So raising our standards, the minutia. And as you saw earlier, I mean, type can be a minefield of small details and minutia. So when we read, our experienced eyes jump almost haphazardly, along the lines. This quick movement is what we call saccades, and we hone in on spots or fixation points, areas of a form and a shape to deduce meaning from these micro moments. And those moments can be of interpretation. They can be either long or short. And read time and comprehension can be really accelerated by choosing type well. So make good readable type choices. So next fact, words in lowercase are much more decipherable than those instead in all caps. So, and this is why, because we store word images deep in our brains. Our subconscious enables swifter reading and interpretation. So we interpret the outer form and less so the letter shapes themselves. So long ascenders and descenders, as it happens in lowercase settings, they can enhance this word shape, for example, the up and down and the rhythm and the inner white spaces. They improve legibility. Prefer to set text in lowercase. In fact, you can set a lot more things in lowercase. It's much more inclusive. So when we also create custom fonts, a lot of times we have a very common request, can we make the letter spacing tidier? And the answer is usually that it depends. Maybe not, maybe yes, because letter spacing is again derived from the type's purpose. What's the purpose of the typeface? Display type can have tighter spacing because they can usually set in very large sizes. And bold type as well can have tighter spacing compared to light type because the interior counters of the bold space are also getting smaller. So we always have to equally balance the white space between and inside the letter forms. And also if you are in Adobe applications, let's say you are in InDesign or somewhere and you're tracking and you have doubts about the spacing, use metrics and start from there. This will provide you with the spacing that the type designer optimized as part of the type design process. And if you set the type in all caps, track them open just a bit. So this will help them breathe a bit, and your project and typeface will say thank you. So as with spacing, we type designers also kern. It's a very fun project. So usually spacing is confused with kerning. So just to clear these things up, spacing is the overall openness of the design, while kerning, it usually refers to kerning pairs. So what this means is that we call them kerning pairs because the kerning concerns only two characters. So in this instance, for example, we have the LDY, the FDA, the TMDO, which they have naturally more open space because of the design of the letter font. So we kern it closer. And again, as with spacing, if you are in Adobe applications and you are using, prefer to use metrics over optical, because this will give you the kerning that is designed in the typeface. And numerals, we all love designing them, and many fonts have OpenType numeral sets. So OpenType tech has been with us, for almost 20 years, and the question is, does anybody use the correct numerals? It's a good question. So let's provide some suggestions. So in most cases, proportional numbers are the way to go because they have varied widths, so they are more appropriate for text. In long-running text, you can use old-style numerals because they have varied heights as well, and they blend better with the text. In headlines, you can use lining, because they look nice and crisp. And as for tabular figures, the one on the right, they all share the same width. So you can use them, for example, when you are setting tables. And maybe don't use old style tabular numbers, I mean, if you do, you might want to rethink some life choices at that point. I don't know. I'm kidding. Back to you, Phil.
Thanks, Emilios. So, understandably, a hot topic in brand design, the world, is diversity, inclusion, accessibility. And we kind of live in a time when brands are racing to be seen as the most equitable and kind of sustainable offer. So our job as designers is to make brands and words both inclusive and attractive. And a few years ago, I worked with MENCAP, the UK's leading charity in disability, to define a typeface as a benchmark in accessible type design. So I worked with MENCAP's UK network to establish some core principles in accessible design, and we tested X height, we tested cap height, stem weight, how narrow the fonts are, how wide the proportions are, every parameter you can imagine about a type. And we defined all these parameters and we created a font called FSME, and it became a new standard in accessible typefaces. So it's important to say, I think, really, that this isn't a dyslexic font, it's an accessible font for readers of mixed abilities. But we found by just enhancing like a few characteristics, a few of the features on the letters, just making subtle, unique moments in kind of each shape, it really helped to make a noticeable difference in reader comfort and comprehension. And being accessible shouldn't really hinder your creative process. I think this is a prime example. Mind is the UK's biggest mental health charity, and Design Studio in London, they reached out to me and just asked, help them make, something more ownable and more distinctive. And they really liked our FS Meridian typeface, which is not an accessible typeface design. So by taking sort of our learnings from MenCap and reviewing areas of ambiguity in this alphabet, we adapted the proportions, we opened the counters and made all these kind of small tweaks. It really helped to kind of broaden the font's reach and update the mind brand without neutralizing it. So accessible type, is a huge part of every big brand project today. It shouldn't really be an afterthought. It's part of the design process. And at Monotype, we conducted a study with MIT regarding kind of type's role in the automotive sector. And that was really interesting because, the auto industry is a brand experience. It's really key to driving value and market share. And there's a very real need for drivers, I think, to process text in as timely a manner as possible. So think about the dials, the navigation, the infotainment, all these things you constantly being updated with whilst you're driving. So our study revealed that a typeface, style can influence distraction as much as 12%. A 12% increase in drive distance is huge at 50 miles an hour. So auto brands must take font selection seriously and choose type with purpose and make it as legible as possible. And inclusion is not only about accessibility, it's about cultural inclusion as well. And why should some information in our world only be available in English? Why should a brand speak in one font in English and choose kind of a less desirable voice in the Middle East or in Asian markets? So the Noto font was pioneered by Monotype for Google and now is owned by the type world at large. And this project really aimed to, make all knowledge accessible to everyone in the world. And the scope of this project was absolutely huge. It's like 146 different writing systems. We're constantly adding more, and it currently supports over 1,000 languages. So I'm sure this is an open source project. Anyone can use them, and literally billions of people do use these fonts. And variable fonts can aid inclusivity. This is our Helvetica now variable font, and this shows just how variable fonts can be a really real problem solver. The optical size axes, it will enable browsers to automatically choose the best possible type design for the size it's being used at to improve accessibility. And inclusivity isn't always about accessibility, it's about diversity, representation, the full spectrum of cultures. I was recently involved, and Emilios was too, in the rebrand of Every, formerly Hermes. Obviously has a mixed reputation as a business, but I worked with SuperUnion to make this kind of adaptive logo type powered by variable font technology for every parcel, person and place. And it's something that's never been done before. And I really like the idea of, really pushing the boundaries of what we can do with variable fonts, representing diversity throughout the adaptation. It's a really diverse visual language and it has inclusive typography. And inclusion is also about just making fonts licensing really simple. For the past few years, we've been tirelessly working on the Monotype's font platform, and it's an app that really enables you to sync the Monotype library of fonts direct to your computer and prototype anything with ease. So this is essentially Spotify for over 30,000 fonts. So we're curating collections of the best fonts in the world. We're writing exclusive content. We're actually giving exclusive access to all the fonts that haven't even been launched yet, months in advance. So we're really just doing this because we want to make good type as simple and as accessible for you as possible. And it's a free app as well, so you can go get it after this talk. And as we level up, we're curiously drawn to the inevitable future, a world gone full meta. And Yoon Park is continuing his research with Microsoft's HoloLens, which is a mixed reality device. And this is type in the built environment, type that moves as we move, type that adapts and is interactive. We can begin making these kind of virtual labels, like layering useful information on top of, a non-HoloLens world. And the usefulness of this really goes beyond kind of the media storm that we see at the moment. Imagine sort of training as a surgeon with virtual bodies, or manufacturing kind of complex components. What will the new book, the new brand experience read and feel like in the future? We can now apply type anywhere. In the digital world, you can also add plated shine. This in a virtual world, it's even easier to kind of be deluxe. This is really interesting stuff from Ogilvy and Maffer in Hong Kong, which is a project called Space to Create. And from the same project, we have this work, which is called Space to Grow. And there's something really seductive about these kind of beguiling, wobbly, kind of bold, expansive letter shapes. And right now, everything is just coming to life. Designers are exploiting kind of the digital spaces of letter forms, the digital spaces within letter forms. We're twisting and turning them inwards, and we're creating these kind of dynamic typographic sculptures. Studio Dunbar, they're breaking letters apart and into smaller particles and introducing this kind of free-form organic construction to modular shapes. And these particles are quite interesting, actually, because they jump between letter to letter, and using a bespoke program created in-house, and just evokes this idea of kind of exchanging ideas. And we can't deny, whether you're on board or not, NFTs are a thing, and they are tentatively entering the type world. That's probably no surprise, really. Font licensing and digital token ownership kind of go hand in hand. Underwear have been launching this project, which is called Grammatographic Haute Couture, and it's a series of 33 NFT artworks available at OpenSea. And at Monotype, we're dipping our toe in with some prolific creators. We've got Margaret Calvert, we've got Paula Shear, sort of creating artworks for this project. I guess NFTs are really uncharted water for many, including us. And what we're really trying to do with this is just invite the graphic design community to follow along with us as we just experiment and see what happens, really. Who knows where it's going to lead us? Of course, we have concerns and unanswered questions like everyone else. Part of this, we've partnered with Avalanche Blockchain, which really is mainly because of their focus on sustainability and the balance of cost and energy efficiency. And all of the creatives involved in this project are going to receive by far the largest share of any revenue generated from the project. And the artists will retain the IP rights to the art they create and sell the NFTs, using our Helvetica and font. Let's just see where it goes. What opportunities lie ahead? As industry leaders, Monotype is well placed to initiate and report back on our typographic features. So hopefully we can share more on this soon. And with that, I think we just say thank you for attending the session today, and we welcome any questions. Thanks so much.
This was amazing, so mind-blowing. You can see how many reactions are coming from everyone in this group. This was absolutely inspiring, and I got so many ideas popping in my head already about the opportunities and the future of typography, how we can all use it to create better, more inclusive design that really benefits all of us. So thank you for sharing your perspective. And yes, it is time for Q&A, which is amazing. And prepare your questions. Please, everyone, type them into the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible in the next half an hour. So feel free to just type them up, and then we will select ones. We'll ask you to unmute yourself so you can ask your question directly as well, to have a little bit more interaction and actually hear who are you all behind the screens, because I love hearing the real voices of real humans on the other side. While everyone is preparing their questions, I wondered, because one of the things that you talked about, this beautiful typography and everything, what do you think about ugly typography? Because I feel like in design currently, there is this big trend on generally ugly kind of graphic design, back to the 90s, back to distorted things, back to things that I don't trust my eyes with those for sure. And people do crazy things with type. What is your view on that? And what should we think about it?
I love it. Absolutely love it, because I'm sort of trained in the era of David Carson, Neville Brody, and I'm fully on board with that kind of intuitive approach to just throwing stuff around and seeing what happens. And it makes more exciting brands, I think. So I'm pro ugly design, I think. What about you, Emilios?
Yeah, I'm not a trained graphic designer, but personally, I feel there is, a place and time and the voice for everything. So if you feel this is okay, go for it. Time will tell. But personally, I don't mind at all. I'm like with Phil. I mean, use whatever you need to make things, look interesting. Because again, ugly or beautiful, these are just words that, they also have personal connotations. Along with them, so my ugly could be your beautiful, or vice versa. Depends. But I think we should have the freedom to experiment and go back or go to the future. Who knows?
I think it's really interesting how variable fonts, because they're so adaptive and changing all the time. Like you could almost say that obviously it's subjective what ugly design is, but it's I mean you could say variable fonts that they're really challenging the notion of kind of continuity or the classic kind of branding ideas, and therefore it could be ugly design as well. But I kind of like that idea that there's continuity from, or cohesion from, inconsistency, maybe. I don't know.
I think I spotted a question earlier about two things. I think the first one was just before we start with others, if you want, just two things that I got. The first one, if we can do variable font animations in After Effects. So After Effects currently does not have, the slider options by default, but the animations you saw in the presentation, I did in After Effects using a plugin, which I bought. There is like a third-party plugin, which you can search and buy if you want. I don't know if we should say the name or not. I don't have any, affiliations. What's the correct word for that? I just found it online, Google it, something like this. And the other one was about bionic reading, I think, which we had actually a slide in the presentation and took out. I think, I'm very curious to see how this develops. I don't know, Phil, what your read is on this. I think it looks interesting, how the bolter for everybody who doesn't know, bionic rating is a suggestion of rating on, based on the movements of our eyes, and it makes the first letters of the word slightly bolted. It doesn't look nice, perhaps, in terms of a graphic design perspective. But I'm really looking forward to read more studies about it. Like, what do the numbers say? How do people
I agree that bionic reading thing is a weird concept to me. I'm not fully on board, but it is easier to read, so I just find it easier. So I can see lots of people just developing plugins for that, just to activate it in sort of brand design systems.
I think there was another one about FSME development on accessibility. If you have any additional information, Phil, I think there is an article somewhere on the Fontsmith page, perhaps.
There is. We have a couple of posts, I think, on the Fontsmith website, which is where we developed it. As I was formerly a creative director at Fontsmith prior to joining Monotype, but we also we haven't really published any sort of white paper on it, but that I can speak to the project. And we tested across the whole network across the UK. It was quite a thorough kind of a project where we created a lot of documents, grabbed a lot of data and reviewed it just to get to where we got to. So check out the blog on the website.
I don't know if you want to pick any more questions, or I have some that I would love to ask as well, or select. Habiba, would you like to ask your question? Habiba is here, but
sorry, I was muted. Hi, guys. Great presentation. Thank you so much. So my question is, because I think that's like a very vague spot for everyone when working with brands and creating brands, and you come to use fonts, I think we don't really understand the whole licensing thing. And then, like, for example, if I get a font and eventually I sort of like tweak it, am I allowed to do that? Can I license that? Like all these questions regarding licensing, especially for branding projects. How does this happen? And like, who's responsible? Like, am I the one responsible as a designer, or is the client responsible for it? It's kind of really scary. You always feel like you're doing something wrong, when you're working on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the world of fonts has got a reputation of being incredibly litigious, unfortunately, and I try to keep out of it as much as I can, to be honest. But it's at the end of the day, we are creating like data like this. The complexity of what we're doing these days is crazy, and like we are building like fonts as they are software. They always have been, but now they're even more complex software. To answer the question, whether you can modify a font, it all comes down to the license, where you bought the font from, what their terms are. Generally, it's a no. I'll be surprised if there are many great fonts that allow you to do that, but yeah, it's generally a no-no. You can't modify the data just because you don't own it. It'll be owned by the designers that created it. And what was the other question? It's quite a big one.
So I was asking about like modifications, and am I as a designer responsible, like when I come to create a font, and if I think like this is the perfect font for the brand, am I the one supposed to like pay for it, or is the company I'm working for pays? Like that's also confusing, because I think like depends on web and the amount of users and that kind of.
That would normally come out of the client budget, like your end client. I would assume it all depends on your agreement with your specific project as well. But yeah, ordinarily we actually work direct with the clients and the agency at the same time, and the end client pays for it.
Yeah, for the modification, I think it comes down to the foundry agreement, like you said, Phil. And for sure, you are not allowed to, I think, modify and create a new font based on the modification, unless the font is an open source, for example, which in that case, you might be able, again, depending on the license. Some foundries allow you to create outlines and modify the outline. Like if you're making a logo and you want a round corner somewhere, this perhaps you can do. So it all comes down to, so yeah, contact with the foundry you work with. Usually people are very happy to help.
You mentioned a good point actually, because logos, like historically, you've always been able to do whatever you want with a typeface and make a logo.
Yeah.
Make it as a vector artwork. And nowadays, a lot of foundries are starting to charge or put restrictions on even doing that, like vectorizing whatever font, and you will get charged a logo license if it's seen out in the wild. So just be careful around that. Make sure you check we don't do that, but check the license in terms from wherever you're buying your fonts.
Just one last thing, like how can you choose something that's as inclusive as possible for brands, for people with visual impairments, yet still has character? Because I feel like finding that fine line with all the restrictions with licensing and like buying fonts, it just becomes too overwhelming to create a brand that speaks out and serves people, yet still like adheres to all these guidelines and rules and gives everyone their like shared due of their work.
There are
a lot of times. Oh, sorry,
go for it. Yes.
No, I was going to answer quickly that a lot of times it also comes down to usage. So, for example, for people with visual impairments, you might want to, have correct contrast, like, for example, white on black, and not like purple on green, which would cause issues with people with color blindness, for example. Again, how you track on how the size you're using, but try to use type which is designed like for text sizes, for example, with more apertures or something that it's more text oriented, not something that it's out there in terms of design, something that is legible, readable. But again, it depends on the project. Each project is quite different, but there are quite a lot of typefaces that can both be, legible, but also nice to see. For example, the Might project that Phil mentioned earlier, it's a prime example of how a typeface can be accessible in terms of how readable it is or legible, but also part of a bigger brand that it's quite expressive. It doesn't hinder itself into the accessibility.
Thank you so much, guys.
You're welcome.
Love it. Love this discussion. Well, we have another question from G4. Juan Ignacio, would you like to ask your question?
Hi to everyone. Thank you. I have a question. In our company, we use Nunito for almost everything in our landing and application. And we have a 2025 roadmap to approach more big business. I think Nunito, it's like a new Comic Sans. I don't like really, but we use in everything, almost in our internal presentations. I hate that, but it's the guidelines of our business. I think it's a bad choice to get bigger clients because don't transmit serious enterprise, I think. What do you think? Thank you very much.
It's always an issue. It's always sad. you have to use a font that you absolutely hate. I mean, that sounds terrible because you get so emotional about these things. But I think I don't know whether I can't say whether it's the new Comic Sans or not. Well, if you don't like it, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, to change the font in a big organization? But I don't know. Where do I go with this question? It's a tough one.
I was going to say that, each typeface has its own essence, aroma. It's a word Phil uses very often. It evokes an emotion. It might be nothing. It might be like Helvetica, or it might be very clean or serious, but it also might be like Comic Sans. It's something that, Comic Sans, again, it was designed with purpose, to go back to Phil's slides, with purpose. So it depends for what the typeface is designed for. So if you want to be more serious, choose, a slightly more serious typeface, or fix the brand around it to, look more serious. I don't know. It's always a lot of, again, I'm not a graphic designer, but the equation is usually really big when it comes to, how serious is something. It's not only the type, it's also the visual language around it, the graphic design treatment and colors you use and everything. So yeah, but if you don't like it, if you feel it already, perhaps it's time to, to change it.
Thank you very much.
I like how much emotion there is around fonts, isn't it? I feel like this is such a subject that, it builds up and you're like, oh, what can I do?
People can.
There was a question previously. I don't know if you have something else, but I can go over this. The question was, know your type history or go nuts? And what is your advice to new designers?
Read everything. Meet people. And when you meet people, meet their friends, or get their friends' business cards. That's what I always used to do when I walked around with my portfolio, at least getting out into the wild. Just read as much as you can, play as much as you can, draw as much as you can. I got into this. I was very lucky. I got an apprenticeship after studying graphic design with Jason. I never studied a formal graphic typeface design course. I just literally met the right guy, and it was just a bit of luck, really. But yeah, I definitely think drawing, if you want to get into this industry, especially into typeface design, just draw as much as you can and practice drawing on screen as well, as much as you can. I remember spending days just drawing like one letter, just a whole day, 8 hours on a lowercase n. It takes a long time to get like good at just drawing a shape. It's frustrating, very frustrating at times. And then getting them to like all work together as a whole harmonious unit, it's really difficult. Just draw lots. That's what I think.
Love it, love it, love it. We have 13 more minutes for questions, and I'm looking forward to asking more of them. Meanwhile, I remind you that we love hearing your insight and sharing your insights. So before you jump off, whatever your thought and the insight that you got, you learn once by hearing, you learn twice by sharing. So actually putting it down on some sort of digital form of social media will actually make you remember this amazing insight that you've got from this webinar. So please do share. We would love to hear what was the most useful. And obviously tag us, tag Monotype, tag everyone, so we all can share the joy and see what you loved about this session. Great. Alla, you had a question. Would you like to ask it?
Hello. Thank you very much for that presentation. I don't know what to expect, but it kind of exceeded any expectations I had. So thank you very much. I had a quick question because I'm 3 years into my agency life. I set up my own agency with a partner 3 years ago, and one of the biggest kind of spaces that I still lack knowledge in is a foundry collaboration. So Monotype is obviously a huge brand that I've been aware of since my uni days over a decade ago up until now, and I only see big agencies collaborating with Monotype. So as a smaller agency, I just wanted to know what it looks like in terms of a partnership. If I was to work with you guys, how does that look? How does it work structurally? If it was to come to a project or a brief, and fees. Really, I would like if you could give a ballpark, because I'm always assuming I would need a massive budget from the client to even talk to you guys. And after seeing real faces on the screen today, I'm like, okay, cool. Can I just reach out to you guys and just have a chat about it? And,
Yeah,
that's my question. So a little bit of just any insights from that. I would just love to get in touch with you guys after and just have a chat.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good. I think there's always there's a common thing oh god, your Monotype, it's so big, and obviously custom type has always appeared to be a very niche thing. We do actually hundreds of projects a year, and we're building the studio up all the time in London. We're Emilios and I, we've got Tom as we're all around the world, and yeah, there is a studio culture. It's not like, it's not a sales company as much as it used to be. So, and also, it's not as expensive as it used to be to design something that's custom, because the tools are just so amazing now. You can just turn around things incredibly quickly, as I said before. Like, so I can't give ballparks. It's probably impossible to do that, because what's expensive for one person might be cheap for someone else. But yeah, no, if you've got a project, like, just literally, it's the easiest thing to do is just have a chat, and then we can figure out like who the client is and try and, figure out what the best way forward is. Like, I just want to explore ideas and just create new things. That's kind of like why I'm involved with it.
I was going to say that we very often have like sessions with agencies that, they don't pay anything. I mean, this is just, us giving like, we have a small workshop with you, or, just talking about type, or it might be something specific, like a short or long presentations, just discussing and becoming friends. And I think this is the idea. And it might not, come today, but it might come in a year or 5, who knows. But that's it. Send a message.
I love this. This is amazing. This is where real magic happens. Robbie, you had an interesting question as well. Would you like to ask it?
Yeah, I was just wondering about creating, like you were talking about creating type for like specific purposes earlier. And I was wondering about fonts for VR. So we use like quite traditional fonts, or fonts that were created for other. Do you think there's like a space for fonts to be created that's specific for VR? Not necessarily in like a 3D sense, but the way it could be used with the environment around you, or the way the VR is used to almost like assist in the way it's read. Because sometimes it has a bit of motion to it, like the examples you showed earlier. It's like linked to an object in the space.
Definitely. Like, I've been thinking about this a lot, literally actually before I joined this call, because I'm speaking to a reporter later in the week about the metaverse. But yeah, I think like so many opportunities. I've been speaking to a lot of designers about how can we create something VR sort of typefaces that adapts, that reflect people's character as you're looking one Oculus to another. Kind of how does type respond in a certain way, and it's the whole perspective thing as well, isn't it? Like, that's that new challenge about, we've got to think in 3D spaces now. How is type going to change or improve legibility, or how, should it get a bit bolder at the front end of a word so you can recognize it a bit more, or whatever, I don't know, or the counters open up. So yeah, it's something that we have been exploring. Like, we do have a team of guys like in the US that are exploring kind of this kind of thing all the time. The same guys that worked on all the type rasterizers that we use in car dashboards. So yeah, it's really interesting. I've seen some fun experiments. I hope that answers the question.
Kevin, would you like to ask your question?
So I kind of have a question, but I don't know how to ask it basically, because I've been I'm I call myself a typographer, and I do lettering sometimes. I work with an agency where I did have opportunities to actually do that, but then it's difficult because I think, in the advertising agency, it's kind of difficult to kind of get these clients to actually be important and show why is this important. And I just wanted to ask, do you guys think like it will be like a time that people will actually think it's important, or type will be more important basically? I'm just asking because because I've been sometimes it works for me, sometimes it doesn't work for me. Even when I'm doing my work, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But I just kind of feel like there should be more importance, because this thing is important, but it's always difficult to kind of tell people about why is it important basically. So if I'm kind of asking the question, but I'm hoping for an answer basically.
Yeah, type is like this. It's weird until you can sort of like explain. You can always, if you visualize it, people get it pretty much all the time. You can just put up any kind of word in any in a brand typeface, and you can say, "Who is this?" and they'll get it. It's like the subliminal identification that happens in the back of their brains, and it's just remarkable. And I don't know, it's when you visualize it and show people the power of it, straight away they're bought into it. But until you've done that, it can be tough because people, you're looking at the cost, you're looking at that, but why should I invest? Blah, blah, blah. And I think you really need to take people to a visual space and explain that visual story. I think that's the biggest win.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same because type does have the importance. Everything it's type when you read it. But when it comes to like convincing people, I think setting it down and visualizing and putting it into context always helps because when you judge a letter from black and white in in a foundries page, it might it doesn't evoke anything. But if you put it in your brand's colors, you put it on an image and you put it big, and people will start to get it. This is our brand. This now it talks our voice. So it always comes down to how you use type, not only what type you choose. And you can do also a comparison, like what do you have now and what you could have. So which one is better? I don't know. But it comes very often, like why is type important? But it's very, very important, not only for reading, but in different contexts, but also to distinguish the brand in this digital chaos we are living today.
I think I love these questions always because I think that literally every community you speak to, like, why design is important. We can't convince clients that design is important. You talk with Sonic agencies that do incredible Sonic brands, like we can't, like, the truth is, I think we are on the right path. And luckily, as creative community, I think more and more brands and businesses recognize the value of creativity and design. I see the very positive trend for all of us, including typographers and musicians and creatives of all kinds, where actually creativity is now, on the rise. So I feel like for all of us, there is incredible opportunities ahead. And it will be easier. It will be easier and easier, I believe, definitely in the brighter future. There is a last question from Nicholas, if I remember it correctly.
My question was about when you design a typeface, how do you... I'm Lithuanian, so I know how Lithuanian words should look like. They use various glyphs and stuff. So when you're designing a typeface, do you collaborate with other speaking languages designers to help you figure out words how it should look like German, for example? They use very weird stuff for me and I have no idea how to design them. So what would your advice be for me in a situation like this, let's say? And I'm a beginner, so I know crap about
you know it.
I know some. I'm downplaying, but yeah.
Well, luckily, Monotype is quite a big company, so we do have a lot of native reading people in the business, but we always work with not sort of native reading designers. Like when we were designing fonts for Colgate for Thai language, we partnered with a foundry in Thailand and anywhere. I mean, Emilios, you can probably speak to this really well as well because you're from Cyprus, so you speak Greek. So I mean,
I think we can't design everything, and I think this is something designers can ultimately just admit. You are not a homo universalis. I mean, you just do this, you do it well, but you always need help if you are going to do something that it's not only nice for the script you're going to design, but it's also culturally appropriate, for example. So indeed, when we are going to do something that is not familiar to what I do every day, like let's say Hebrew or Thai or Arabic, we always collaborate with people that are native to the script, so they can not only judge the design better, because design quality I can judge like the curves, but I cannot judge the context, which is what the type is going to be used about. So it's always important. I mean, find friends that can help you, or just tweak things. I mean, people are usually very, very open in Twitter to provide opinions, which is, a good thing if you are designing something and learning. So just throw something up, an image, and ask people, what do you think? Or ask who could help you, and there's always someone who can. But yeah, don't be a general advice I would have, don't be shy to reach out to people, especially type designers. I think they're very, very happy to share knowledge in general. This has been, I've been helped a lot through colleagues and friends. And it's always a process that it's really good. And but you just have to reach out to people. I mean, I wouldn't know you, so I know you now. If you have any questions about Greek, reach out. So yeah, this is it. It's very easy usually.
I love this answer, and I love that we're finishing this conversation on the note about finding friends. So answer to everything is find friends from around the world, and they'll help you. They'll figure out all your typography problems or any other cultural questions you have. And this will again brings me so much joy. There are so many of you joined here. So definitely find friends. Thank you all so much for joining. And Emilios and Phil, what an incredible presentation, mind-blowing. We talked about empathy. We talked about Web3. We talked about metaverses. Like, what else can you wish for on a Monday evening in a conversation about typography? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining. Yeah, thank you so much.